I kind of, when the team first suggested that I come up and do a fireside chat here, I had this vision of, some big armchair and a glass of cognac and a nice big cigar, but this will work. So anyway, so microservices with Red Hat middleware. First of all, I know we've talked a lot today about infrastructure, and that makes a lot of sense. Red Hat is sort of longest known for and most known for, certainly our Linux and related products, and very much a suite of products on the infrastructure side of the house, for the data center and the ops guys. But we've actually also had an amazing set of developer-oriented offerings for a number of years as well. You just heard a little bit here with Steve and some of what's going on the mobile front. And then some of what we'll talk about here is the wider suite of products that we refer to as middleware. Red Hat has been in the middleware business since we acquired JBoss in 2006, so quite a long time, more than a decade here. Over those years, we've expanded and fleshed out the portfolio in I would say, a pretty compelling way. Hopefully, many folks in the room are familiar with some of those technologies, and if some of what we can achieve here is to maybe highlight and inspire some new ways of thinking about middleware in the age of cloud native and the age of digital transformation, we'll have achieved our goal here. So just to, in the highest shovel to the forehead, most brain dead way, set up what is this all about, there's a very simple train of logic, right? In the context of modern projects, whether it's digital transformation, digital disruption, there are many great monikers for this sort of, the current wave hitting us, right? One of the most important things that agencies, enterprises, organizations around the world need to do is to innovate quickly, right? Part of the whole point of digitizing and bringing digital capabilities to a wider range of processes, products, offerings, services, et cetera, is to be able to roll out change more quickly. And so in order to do that, well, what do you need? You need applications. You need the actual pieces of software that end users touch and feel and interact with on a day-to-day basis. You need those applications to be much more adaptable than they've been. They can't be these massive, monolithic software beasts that it takes months or even years to change, to undo, to swap out, to augment, et cetera. And the technical implication or the technical conclusion from that very simple train of logic or train of need is that we need much finer granularity in our software estates, right? In our infrastructure, in the set of services and capabilities that our developers and heads of business, heads of agencies, heads of various organizations that consume the capabilities of these various applications, they need to be able to make faster, more incremental change, and in order to do that, the software has to be constructed so that smaller pieces can be modified at any given time. That finer granularity means that there's less risk when a change is made, that it takes less time to try something to see if it works or doesn't work. It enables that fail-fast approach that has been mentioned and alluded to several times already this morning. It is the essence of what microservices is all about. Now, part of what this is an evolution as opposed to a revolution, right? We've already, as an industry, gotten part of the way there with service-oriented architecture that started to evolve maybe 10, 12 years ago. That decomposition, that granularity of modularization that was achieved in those years already got us thinking in the right direction. And in a way, what microservices is all about is taking that to the next level. And one of the particular advantages of the most modern approaches to this fine-grained modularity, this microservices approach, is real composition. We got part of the way there, again, with SOA in terms of reusing modules, but those modules were decomposed at such a coarse granularity that they had enough domain or application-specific logic embedded in each of them that in many cases it was really hard to reuse a lot of those SOA modules, those old-school, coarser-grained modules. But now, with the advent of real microservices capabilities, enabled by containers, enabled by orchestration like the Kubernetes baked into our OpenShift offering, you now can construct fine-grained enough services that what you give to your developers, and even not necessarily developers, but business analysts and application composers, is a smorgasbord of pieces that can be recombined in various ways to achieve that agility, to achieve that quick innovation, which is what it takes to do digital transformation. So, what's needed in order to make that pretty little picture, that piece of slideware, actually viable? So we argue that there are three things, or three basic categories of middleware in this case, the basic building blocks that developers need to build the services that become applications. You need the right runtimes, you need the right way of putting together the individual modules, in other words, the right integration, and a key repeated acronym on this slide is API. APIs are absolutely critical in this world of microservices, and integration via APIs and managing APIs as such with microservices-oriented API management is critical. Once you have the pieces built, running on the right runtimes and connected together in the right way, you then enable a higher level of automation, right? Through process-driven technologies such as business rule systems, business process management systems, you then are able to take advantage of your microservices architected underlying technology and automate way more steps in a given process. So, okay, those three categories, clearly we're setting them up because we believe we have compelling technologies to offer in each of those areas. And I'll start with the runtimes. JBoss EAP, Enterprise Application Platform, that has been the cornerstone of the middleware portfolio, again, since we acquired JBoss 11 years ago. And as I'll show in a second, this is absolutely still a very compelling, very importantly useful technology in the context of microservices, particularly because of its lightweight. And just to be technical and quantitative about that for a moment, I had a couple of technical guys on my team just do some basic side-by-side comparisons where we looked at JBoss EAP with the web profile against Spring, against a Tomcat example, and against a Spring Boot Fatjar example. And if you look along dimensions of server boot time, how long it takes to restart a process in each of those configurations, with and without the full load of the application's data, and then look at memory usage with and without load. And then ultimately, the thing that really matters for running applications, what kind of throughput do you get? You see that for not too dissimilar an actual footprint, JBoss EAP, first of all, it screams on the throughput front, which in some ways, once you think about it, makes sense because it's battle-hardened. It's been through a lot of maturation and hardening over its decade-plus history. Some of the other technologies, while in superficial ways they may seem lighter weight, there's still overhead to get them going, and all that stuff that's regarded as heavyweight and seems to have to go somewhere, there's no free lunch, right? Somebody has to do it somewhere. And then when you look at the system as a whole, you see that the differences are less dramatic than might otherwise be sort of presented. The right runtimes also includes some more microservices-specific offerings that we're coming to market with. We have this in technology preview right now, and we will have it generally available by the end of the year, and that's our ROAR, Red Hat OpenShift Application Runtime. So this is a set of runtimes to complement JBoss EAP and enable some of the other more, again, microservices-specific runtimes out there, such as Spring Boot, such as Vertex, such as Node.js. Now, the right integration. So for many years, we've had our JBoss Fuse based on Apache Camel and JBoss AMQ based on Apache ActiveMQ. More recently, we added 3Scale, which is a set of technologies to enable API management. And when we speak with Martin in a couple of moments here, we'll look at some more examples that are actually using some of that 3Scale technology. Again, highlighting that API, that important role that APIs play in a microservices architecture. And then last but not least, on the automation front, we've had our JBoss BRMS, Business Rules Management System, based on the Drools upstream, a very successful, very highly regarded rules engine technology, which is also included in our wider BPM suite, Business Process Management Suite, to enable sort of more automation at a macro workflow level. So, and let me just finalize this sort of formal piece here by saying that all of the Red Hat JBoss middleware that I've been speaking about now is all containerized and enabled on OpenShift. It is middleware as services for that next generation microservices-oriented development. So with that, let me invite up Martin Folkoff from Booz Allen Hamilton to talk with us a little bit about some of the projects that Booz Allen has been doing out there in the real world and some of their very practical experiences with microservices. Thanks so much, Martin, for joining us. If these are working. Are these okay, here we go. We'll switch into fireside chat mode here. So imagine, if you will, a raging, beautiful fire behind us.
Very
Let
warm.
me hand you a glass of Louis XIII. Do you prefer Cohibas or anyway? So Martin, now that I've kind of given maybe a vendor product-oriented pitch here, and I'm sure the audience is like, okay, we've heard the pitch. Tell us how does this stuff really get used? So it's kind of a way of wading into the deeper end of the pool here. First of all, what's your sense of how microservices are really being adopted? Like, is there, are all the projects that you're doing these days, everybody's saying microservices, or it's still kind of, it's a fringe, esoteric thing? I mean, kind of where are we on that sort of evolutionary path, as it were?
Yeah, so I think, like you mentioned earlier, one of the best attributes of being in a microservice environment is your ability to evolve very quickly your system to match whatever the driving factors may be. And so if you're in an environment that has a lot of, could be business-driven motivations or technology-driven motivations to consistently make, you mentioned incremental changes all the time, right? That's when microservices are going to be by far your best option to go to, because that is the best channel there is today to get to a point where you can fundamentally keep your risk low, but at the same time rapidly evolve to meet whatever the demands may be. And so when we go out and we meet with different clients and we kind of discuss where they are, they're in an environment where they have these needs, where they need to have an ability to have rapid changes. Microservices are definitely where we tend to push our clients.
So you're pushing them, and it sounds like in particular these areas where that rapid change is most necessary. Are you finding resistance? Are you finding appetite and sort of acceptability towards these approaches? I mean, what's the general sort of feel out there on the part of your clients?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of excitement about microservices, and there should be. It's a really cool idea, but like anything, there's also, I think, a lot of fear, because naturally, it's a very big subject. It's very hard to define. How big is a microservice? You get all these kinds of questions, and it can be difficult to kind of make sure that you balance the needs of the business that you have there and your investment in the technology or the platforms that give you the ability to live in a microservice world. And I think that's where we have a lot of communication that go back and forth between us and the clients around what does that investment look like to get to the point where you can be in a microservice environment, and why do you want to do that? And I think once that conversation is kind of in place, and people I think everyone really sees that microservices are the way to go.
Got it. So what are some of the specific characteristics of the technologies that you use in creating these microservices-based, solutions for your clients? What are some of the things that you depend on and look for, and maybe highlight, to some extent, some of the particular Red Hat technologies you may have used, the middleware in conjunction with OpenShift, for example, how those have been particularly helpful in those areas, and wherever possible, I know some of your clients, I'm sure, are under sort of non-disclosure, but to the extent that you can sort of characterize the kinds of projects you've been doing and where these fit in, it'd be great to share some of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's important to when you're going into any kind of microservice discussion to understand that there's a huge ecosystem of industry that's there for you. Specifically Red Hat, that has a lot of the platform components that you absolutely need to enter the microservice world. It's definitely not a free lunch when it comes to being able to orchestrate and manage and deploy. And when you're in the microservice world, that comes at a huge cost. And you need to kind of partner with somebody else to help you manage how each of those different components are going to fit into your microservice environment. And so we've worked really closely with agencies like USCIS to understand their needs and to make sure that we're bringing them the right components with the right security. Things like OpenShift have been absolutely critical to their successful microservice implementation. Things like the Fuse and other of those products that allow us to integrate a bunch of dynamic moving parts around that whole enterprise, right? Those are very difficult challenges to do. Things that, when you get into the distributed systems problems and all that, you definitely don't want to be alone trying to work all that out yourself. And so, we're very much dependent on Red Hat and other vendors to make sure that the microservice, system as a whole is going to be reliable.
Now, how about API management? So we've been really driving around a theme of agile integration for the last several months. And we think of that as an overall approach to integration that's microservices oriented, that's API led, and really takes advantage of the API management technologies that we acquired with 3Scale and combining that with the Fuse and AMQ capabilities. Are there maybe any example projects where you use those technologies and that sort of agile integration approach, and maybe comment on that?
Yeah, so anytime you have this microservice environment, you want to play kind of this careful balance between how smart your different services are, or what kinds of logic that goes into each of those services. Because unlike a monolith where you may have a lot of controls or a lot of non-business functional logic that resides in there that the different components can share, that problem becomes much more complicated when you have lots and lots of little things that all share the same problem. Kind of like authorization and securing the different kinds of requests. All of those kinds of issues need to be solved at the microservice level if you don't have a utility like an API management tool. And so we do recommend to our clients, whenever we get into those scenarios where you start to grow into having scenarios that you don't want to necessarily solve that issue for each of the different individual services, have another layer of control that allows you to maintain a single place for you to update and manage the shared needs of the system. And things like 3PAO have been crucial for us to understand, or actually have a working implementation of that very, very quickly for our clients. So
if I can read between the lines or maybe slightly restate, I'm inferring that with the sheer number of individual entities that one has in a microservices architecture, right? You've gone from a small number of medium or big things to a large number of very small things. You obviously just mathematically have many more connections, and those connections get harder and harder to manage at scale, which then translates into, well, you need a way to manage them sort of consistently with high performance, with high reliability and security. So it sounds like you're getting some benefit from using API management specific capabilities in that context.
Yeah, absolutely. And then one of the main things that you don't want to run into is you don't want to solve that particular problem for one of the services and then have that done either incorrectly somewhere else or just not done at all, right? And so for a lot of these shared components, you want that done right the first time and to solve it for everybody. And that way gives you an opportunity to focus more on what matters to your business, the business specific functions that your microservices should be doing, not the how do I talk to that guy and how do I make sure that my circuit breaking logic is not going to be faulty or anything like that. That goes off to somebody else. You can focus on what's important to your business.
Got it. So as just a final thought here, just to sort of wrap up our brief session, and this has been great. Really appreciate you joining us here. What are some of the things that you are looking to the future that you just can't wait for, vendors like Red Hat and the open source community and the industry in general to sort of make easier or provide you so that these microservices approaches can be, sort of that much, faster and easier?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's definitely a rapidly evolving place, and I think I've kind of attended a bunch of different conversations today that all center around security, and partnering with Red Hat and understanding that their diligence in security is one of the best in the world, right? That's where we want to be. And as that evolves and becomes more consistent and more compliant with everything that the government wants to see, that's just going to be so much easier to walk into an environment and say, what are your business requirements? Okay, great, let me go solve those particular things, and I can just build on a platform that lives in this world that is compliant, and we don't have to really go through this whole kind of rigmarole every time.
Got it. So kind of a solidification of all the core needs into a coherent platform where just a lot of stuff is just kind of push button simple.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of times we want to focus on what matters to the client too. We want to build out the business critical functionality, and it's a hard problem to solve when there's all these other requirements that aren't related to the actual business needs or the citizens' needs that we need to solve. And the less time we spend on that stuff, the more time we spend on how can we make the business more functional, the better.
Awesome. Martin, this has been fantastic. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.